On the bench today we have a vintage 1960s Blackface Showman. The amp was making all sorts of noises and was apparently at another repair center, but the symptoms are still showing. Before I go ahead and fully disassemble it, let me show you some of the symptoms. It was obvious straight away that there's an issue with the filter section of the amp. I started removing the chassis screws and preset my amp cradle for it. Sliding the chassis out of these Blackface amps is more difficult than it seems. On one of the clones I've built, I wondered whether it was my bad that the chassis was not sliding out easily. But then when I tried to remove the chassis on the originals, I realized that it's the same, so I guess it's just the way it was designed and built in the first place. Once the chassis was out, I put it on the amp stand and took a closer look at it. To my surprise, almost all of the parts were original, except for a few resistors and the bias filter cap. These large electrolyte caps should have been replaced by the previous service tech, since they are not good for sure. Let's flip the chassis over and check the main filter caps. Opening the Pandora doghouse box can be full of surprises. At least the spider knew where the good vibrations are. And the moment of truth. Well, the filter capacitors have been replaced at some point in time, but upon a closer inspection it turned out that some of the values are wrong and the voltage specs of the original was not met. Instead of using a commonly used value of 100 microfarads at 350 volts, they've used 220 microfarads at only 250 volts. These first two caps are in series and should be able to withstand the current surge and voltage spikes when the amp is turned on. And also the caps have West Germany label on them, which means they are at least 30 years old. Let's take a moment to check the tubes. As always the case, all are different brands. The customer was not concerned about the tubes or other small issues with the amp. He was mainly worried about the noise and wanted me to replace just the critical components so that something more major doesn't fail. This amp will definitely need a thorough restoration in the future, but for now we will do what the customer wants and let's change the filter caps first. These are the new caps. You want to use the best quality you can find. Changing these caps with some cheap, underrated caps will not do amp any good. On these kind of point-to-point wired amps, I like to replace the filter caps with the tube amp doctor made ones, and also use the orange drops to replace the paper caps. I made sure that there are no voltages present in the amp before I continued. When working on these eyelet boards, make sure that you don't disturb the contacts and wires that are underneath the board. Those connections are critical and should be left the way they are. Also, don't leave the soldering iron too long, just long enough to suck up the solder or to melt the solder when installing a new part. After I've replaced the filter caps, I slowly raise the voltage to form the new ones. The main noise that was present in the amp, even with the volume down, was completely gone, but upon checking the output tubes I've noticed the noise was still there. This amp needs a full restoration, but that will be another video in the future, I hope, once the owner decides what to do. Upon later inspection I realized that the power transformer has been rewound for European voltages, and the nuts and the bolts that are holding it together were not tightened enough, so it was making the 50 Hz buzz. When you have an old original transformer which was made for 60 Hz and 115 volts or so, it is very difficult to convert it since the 50 Hz is slightly more challenging for the transformer to handle than the 60 Hz, so it takes more windings on the same core size. I've tightened the screws later on off camera and the buzz is now completely gone. I've switched to changing the two signal caps for the output tubes, which were leaky, and also the rest of the cathode bypass filter caps on the main board. Just out of curiosity, I've checked one of the filter caps on the capacitor meter and it shows absolutely nothing. Nothing comes close to a vintage transparent cathode bias bass boost. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me and help me make more videos and more projects, please check the Patreon page in the link in the description. Thanks for watching.